Welcome to the Red Chip Poker Podcast, where we share stories and strategies from the game's most fascinating minds. No matter where you are in your poker journey, there's always something new to learn. So let's get right into today's conversation with your host, Robbie Straczynski.
Hey everyone, Robbie Straczynski here hosting the Red Chip Poker Podcast. On today's show, we're happy to bring on a good friend of mine. He's a longtime professional poker player, World Series of Poker Bracelet winner, and co-owner of the iNinja Poker Tour, Chris Wallace. Welcome to the show, Chris.
Thanks, Robbie. I'm glad to be on it for my first time.
Oh, very nice. I didn't realize you'd never been on before, so welcome. How you doing this evening? I know it's a little bit late for you in Las Vegas.
This is not late for a poker pro. It's only 11. It's the middle of my day.
That's true. I hear you.
It was Super Bowl weekend, so I played the last 3 nights till 4 a.m, basically. I mean, you got to make the money when it's good. Right.
Well, I hear you. And I'm sure a lot of our listeners can identify with that. And I know I do. I'm not even like a professional grinder or anything, but that's just our schedule. Okay. So the first portion of our discussion today, we're going to focus on Pot Limit Omaha, PLO. But before we dive into it, I mentioned in the intro that you won a WSOP bracelet, and that was in the 10K horse event. So obviously you're very familiar with numerous poker variants. What's special to you about PLO in particular? What appeals to you about the game?
I think the reason that, when Doyle Brunson says no limit hold'em is the Cadillac of poker, the reason I think for that is that he's saying there's so much poker and so little cards involved. Mm-hmm. And Omaha is, when played well, even more that way. Omaha is, the hands run so close pre-flop, the equities pre-flop. Things are so much more important than your cards. Your cards are so much less important in Omaha than they are in almost any other game that it makes it a really interesting game to me. And also, it's so much farther from being mastered that even fairly good players still have big holes in their game. I know I have huge holes in my game all over the place, but even the very best players are still don't have a really good understanding of this is the best way to play the game. Computers are really bad at playing it compared to No Limit. It's just a game that's much farther from being solved and much more complicated.
Mm-hmm. And I suppose that's sort of a little bit behind why it's becoming more popular over the last couple of years, you think?
Yeah, and the action. The recreational players, the anybody who really likes to gamble, anybody who wants to get it in the middle, but Omaha's the game for you.
Right. Before the show, you mentioned to me that last year you had created a PLO cash series for the folks here at Red Chip Poker. First of all, when and how did you connect first with the Red Chip Poker community? How did that come about?
I've actually known about Red Chip for years. Mm-hmm. I used to play in Minnesota with Hunter Sitchy, who was a coach here years ago, and he told me Red Chip was great and the guys are great. And so I always thought if I left the training side I was with at the time that I would get in contact with Red Chip. And when that happened, I emailed Doug and made it happen. And it's an amazing resource. I mean, I've bought memberships for a couple of my friends who are constantly asking me for coaching, and I'm happy to help people out, but it's also what I do for a living. I mean, I have a buddy who fixes cars, and I don't expect him to fix my car for free all the time. So, and I know these people can't afford and don't want to spend what I charge for coaching because they're just kind of recreational players who want to get good and play a lot. Mm-hmm. And they're not going to pay me, $100 a week for an hour of coaching. And even if I give them a discount, it's just not going to be great for them. Whereas if I buy them a Red Chip membership, it just saves me all the hassle.
Right.
So it saves me like 10 hours a week of answering text messages and things for these guys if I just buy them a Red Chip membership. So I go, here, go to this, we'll go through the core, go through the No Limit crash course, and then we'll be talking a different language, and then you and I can have more productive discussions. But these things will give you all the base, all the important stuff that you really need. And then, I'm not going to text to Michael Jordan to ask him things like, should I shoot more threes? Like that's not, it just doesn't make sense, And I'm not the Michael Jordan of coaching, but I'm probably an NBA player in terms of poker coaches and answering the simple questions isn't my job. And Red Chip does it so well that I buy them memberships and deal with it that way.
And I got to say, full disclosure, Chris has not seen these questions, and I was not looking for anything. There's no paid endorsement, anything like that. I was really genuinely curious, so it's pretty cool to hear, the genuine connection. And of course, it does make plenty of sense. It's a fantastic place to get great coaching resources, and that's why we're all here. So about this PLO Cash series that you did last year, why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, when I first came to. It's been my experience with other training sites as well. New ones pop up, they hire me, then they go broke because they don't manage their site well, and it happens over and over again. Red Chip has stuck around, so good news for them. They survived when a lot of places didn't. But it's very common for that to happen. That they bring me in and they say, okay, we want mixed game content. The mixed games they find that people want to learn about are primarily PLO, and occasionally there's stud or something, but it's usually PLO. That's the biggest mixed game out there right now. It's the biggest kind of alternate to No Limit out there right now. So they said, we want a PLO series. And the making of that cash series was interesting because I am not an expert PLO player. I am certainly a profitable PLO player, and I'm interested in the game. But I don't play it every day, and I know a number of people who are much better than I am. When they said we want a big PLO cash series, I actually called two of my friends who are poker pros, but kind of just smaller level grinders who were very good Omaha players. And I said, hey, I need to learn some stuff about Omaha, and took a lesson from each of them, and then went through a couple of more books and studied the game and looked at some forums and made sure that my game was up to snuff. I don't be making, they pay me pretty reasonable money to make these videos, and I don't want to give them junk. So I had to really brush up on, make sure that my PLO game was really sharp and that I knew what I was talking about. It taught me some things about the game that I didn't know before, and I'm a much better PLO player than I was before I made that series. And the things that I learned to make that series were really valuable.
Right. And how many videos are in the series? I admit I have not seen it. So how many videos and approximately how long?
3 videos, averaging about half an hour. I think the first one's a little shorter, and the next 2 are a little longer than half an hour.
Nice. And what would you say is sort of the goal of the series? Like, who is the primary person watching that, and what should be a person's goal when they tune into these 3 half-hour videos?
What Doug and James told me was they want a PLO series for people who are switching over from No Limit, or who are No Limit players that are interested, which is, almost everybody who starts playing PLO is already a No Limit player. So that was my goal, is to take those people and talk about the differences. If I were teaching someone the very basics of PLO, assuming they had never played poker before, it'd be a very different series. And I just assumed everybody knew quite a bit about No Limit. If they don't, there's all the No Limit coaching they could want. They're already a member, so I don't need to teach them those things. I need to teach them how PLO is different. So I focused a lot on how the pre-flop game is completely different, and hand equities pre-flop don't mean so much. And I think learning to play PLO well will make you a better Hold'em player, because PLO focuses on all of the other things instead of pre-flop hand equity that it's so easy to get stuck on. It's very easy for No Limit players to just say, I was ahead pre-flop, and feel like they played the hand well.
Right.
And so often they're just getting tortured and they have no idea. So with PLO, you're focused on deception, position, bad opponents, having hands that can really flop something, stack size manipulation, and all those kinds of things that aren't what are your cards.
Got it.
So I think being able to focus on those things really helps you when you go back to play No Limit, because now you're starting to see that No Limit is a different game than you thought it was, and you get away from that just worrying about pre-flop hand equity all the time.
Yeah, I like it. Have you gotten feedback from anyone, and if so, what has it been?
I have. I've sent a couple of my students to go watch the series, and they really liked it. And I've heard from a couple of Red Chip members on Twitter who liked it as well. It seems to have gotten positive responses. Alternate game videos never get quite as much responses. Of course. Here's the video of me winning the Sunday Million. That's a video that blows up. But it did get, all the feedback I heard was positive. So I guess I did a pretty good job.
Excellent. And, I guess in the same vein, perhaps, I'm not sure, it's a little speculation, was that the motivation for this next thing that you're currently working on, the PLO tournament series? Is that right? Or was that something just completely different?
No, that's exactly it. Cat Martin, who's been on the show, Cat's been a friend of mine for many years. I love Cat. He's a good dude. And he's doing more with Redship now. He's working with content and other things, and so Kat said, why not a tournament PLO series? We don't have anything about that, and that was a whole nother new journey for me, where I had to go learn more about tournament PLO and see what kinds of things were different, make sure that I understood everything. If I was to say make a Raz video right now, I feel like I'm a world-class Raz player, and I can just make that video. And I'm not going to go online and learn a bunch of things about Raz that I don't know.
Right.
But with tournament PLO, I need to learn things. So I started asking my friends that have won PLO tournaments and things like that, and I started learning from them and making sure that the things I thought about tournament PLO were correct, and reading things online. And I ran a lot of hands and equity calculators and spreadsheets to make sure that I was doing the right things. And there were a few spots where I wasn't doing the right things. So again, a PLO series makes me a better PLO player by learning about it as I make it.
I love it. And what would you say, I guess, would be a couple of the notable differences between the tournament series and the cash game series?
One of the big focuses is with tournament, stack size is very different. And one of the things I focus on with all my tournament students with No Limit is understanding different stack sizes and which weapons you have, and different ways to find fold equity. And there's so many different things to do with stack to pot ratios in tournaments. And that changes everything, because cash game PLO is almost always everybody you play with is going to have more than 100 big blinds. When I go back to Minnesota, I play in a 5 to 100 game there. It's a spread limit capped at 100, but it plays bigger than most 2-5 games. And the typical buy-in is like 1,500. And you just never, I play 2-5 at the win. I play 2-5 No Limit, Hold'em at the win. And that's the biggest 2-5 game in Vegas. And the average stack at the table is usually around 12 or 1,300. And I often play in the 1-2 PLO at the win, where the average stack is 1,500. The stacks are always very deep. So good cash game players are used to very deep stacked, 200, 300, 400 big blind situations. And in tournaments, you don't see a lot of those.
Right.
After level 5, nobody's going to have more than 100 big blinds, hardly ever. And after level 10, there's certainly not.
Right.
Other than maybe a World Series event with a crazy structure. But generally, you just don't see those big stack sizes, and you're having to deal with stacks of 10, 20, 30 big blinds. And cash game players have no idea how to play with those stacks. The cash game players never played a hand with 10 big blinds. Maybe in his life, it just doesn't happen. So then understanding how the equities work differently, because we have these understandings of a lot of rules in No Limit. And I see people in PLO tournaments do this sometimes. When I play them online, I see people will re-steal as if it's Hold'em. And re-steals are very different in PLO because the hand equities are so close together that you're going to get called much more often, but you've got more equity when you get called, and that makes for a completely different set of re-steal ranges and different ways to find fold equity. There's also, there are situations in No Limit Hold'em where, say you've got 6 big blinds and there's a raise to 2.2 big blinds and 3 callers, and you have like 6-4 offsuit, where you pile it in there because the original raiser is going to re-raise, and you're going to be getting like 4-1 on your money with 6-4, and you're in great shape. Well, in PLO, you can do that with 12 big blinds if you think the spot is good. And in No Limit, that just, if you know you're going to get called, that's suicidal. But in PLO, if you know you're going to get called, that's fine, because there's an extra 6 big, 8 big blinds in the pot. And that's fantastic, because the hand equities are going to be so close. If he shows you the aces and kings and you have like 4, 5, 6, 9, you're still fine. Short stack stuff and the re-steal stuff, the shorter stack things are very different. And so I did actually kind of an intro tournament PLO is the first one, and then deep stacked tournament PLO is the second one, and then short stack tournament PLO is the third one. And the short stack one is really interesting because I had to, build some table graphics and show people spots where here's fold equity, here's call equity, here's spots where you can find these things, because PLO is the only game where you would be finding them in these ways.
So you're saying, in a sense, now you were saying that the PLO cash game was a little bit more for a beginner's type of audience transitioning out of No Limit Hold'em. But I'm getting the sense from what you're talking about here that the tournament series, even experienced cash game players could really benefit from.
Absolutely, I find very few good PLO players, but very few good PLO tournament players. And one of the things I talk about in the video is how soft the fields are. People make really big mistakes all the time. Even otherwise good players, and even a lot of good cash game players just don't play PLO tournaments very well.
Wow. A lot to ponder there, and certainly makes you think, if the edges are that big, maybe I should give it a try.
They really are. And after making these videos, I'm excited to play some PLO tournaments at the series this year.
Nice. It doesn't just teach the students, it also teaches the teacher, as you said.
Absolutely.
Well, we're going to continue our discussion with Chris Wallace and ask him a bit about his own poker play these days, as well as about his new venture, the iNinja Poker Tour. But first, a little strategy break.
Hello, this is Doug with Red Chip Poker, and we're going to go over Mission 9 from my original book, Poker Plays You Can Use. These missions give you something concrete you can do at the table the next session to make you a tougher player. In this mission, what we want you to do is to make a speculative continuation bet 3 times during the session. This can be difficult, so it may take you a few sessions before you're able to accomplish it. And what we mean by a speculative continuation bet is one that is not directly for value, but instead is being bet to partially deny equity to the other player and to possibly build the pot in case we win. So we're going to have one of each category here. We are going to have protection bets, which are there mostly to deny equity. What would a protection bet be? Let's say you're on a dry static board as a pre-flop raiser, and you have something like King 8 for rainbow. There are not a lot of natural bluffs on this board. There are not any flush draws. There are not any straight draws. So it's going to be hard to find good bluffs on this board, but you need to have them. And so you can look to your protection bet as your bluff. A protection bet would be taking a hand like pocket deuces that have significant value, but remember, every hand that is against them has basically 2 overcards. And if we make a small bet on this dry board, we're often going to get the opponent to fold that 25% equity that 2 overcards have on this board. And so that would be a protection bet on this dry static board. If we get called, well, we're probably beat, or they just have 2 overs, we're in position, and maybe can check it down and still get to showdown. But that is going to be one expansion into speculative continuation bets that would count for this mission. The other one is to look into making continuation bets on these dry static boards with something more speculative, like a 3 straight 3 flush. If you have a 3 straight 3 flush on that King 8-4 board, maybe with like 9-10, with a backdoor spade draw, then about half the deck is going to give you an 8 or 9 out draw on the river, and that will allow you to barrel profitably. Now, this mission is all about expanding your continuation betting repertoire to include things that are not good fits with the board for value. So if it would be a push for you to bet a nut flush draw out of position as a C bet, then that is pushing your limits, and that would count for this mission. Remember, in this mission, we want to be logical about what we are choosing for our continuation betting range as far as these speculative bets go. You don't want to just randomly choose a hand that has no equity when called. That is the exact opposite of what we're trying to do. We are looking for hands that have good reasons for betting. All right, if you like this kind of thing, you can go look at Core, and that is our curriculum for learning Hold'em on Red Chip Poker. There's going to be a section that would be useful in this mission all about betting and c-betting. And if you want more of these missions written in paper form, you can always get that from my book. That is Poker Plays You Can Use. Find it on Amazon. Now let's get back to the podcast.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Red Chip Poker Podcast. I'm still Robbie Straczynski, and I'm still here with our guest, Chris Wallace. Chris, you enjoying the discussion so far?
Absolutely.
Good.
It's a fun subject.
Good. Well, I mean, we are going to switch topics just a little bit. You know, everyone loves talking about themselves, so let's talk about you a little bit. Let's ask about your own poker play. You said you're from Minnesota. You live in Las Vegas. Where do you normally play poker these days? How often?
Well, let me start with what you said. Everybody loves to talk about themselves is a thing I tell my students all the time. If you want to know about somebody at a live game, just ask them questions. And if you just ask them questions, they'll talk to you all day. And they will never ask you questions, and they won't ask you what you do for a living. And they won't ever know that you're good at poker. And they'll tell you all about how they feel about poker. And what's better than that? It's great.
Well, you're on to me, Chris. I have to admit, basically this entire interview is so I could get a good read on you next time we sit at the table. So you got me.
Very clever. Very clever. And as to where I play these days, I bounce around depending on which conventions are where and where I think the games are going to be good. You know, when the Super Bowl was here, I went to the Rio and Planet Hollywood. Their sports books are very close to their poker rooms. There's a lot of gamble there, a lot of tourists there, and a lot of the grinders, a lot of headphone grinders, as I call them, or book bag grinders, were at Caesars, Aria, and the Wynn, and the Venetian. So during those times, they kind of go there looking for the feast. And I find that really some of the best money is at Rio and Planet Hollywood and places like that are very sportsbook and touristy oriented. And they usually are places I wouldn't play. I mean, playing at the Rio when it's not the World Series is basically never going to happen for me. They just don't have games that are worth it. But during that time, they're great. And when the Cowboys are in town for the rodeo, you got to be at MGM or Caesars. Because a lot of the rodeo happens at MGM, and a lot of them come to Caesars to see Reba and Brooks and Dunn, and they walk out of that show, and the poker room's right there. You know, so it depends on when CES is in town. The Venetian's good. Like, you got to just go kind of where the best money is. But the rooms that I like the best when there's nothing special going on are generally the Wynn. And sometimes Caesars, and often Caesars just because it's very comfortable because the 2-5 game hasn't been great there lately. Whereas the 2-5 game, the Win is just usually good, and especially during the day, that's kind of the spot. And it's a beautiful room. I just really like it there.
Certainly, it is beautiful. I've played there a number of times as well. It's interesting that you mentioned that. You know, not everyone out there has the luxury of choosing between dozens of different poker rooms. That's something that's very unique to Las Vegas, or perhaps Southern California, a little bit, maybe Northern California. It's interesting to hear from a Las Vegas local in that sense how important game selection is. It's a constant awareness of, okay, I'm not just going to go ahead and head to Red Rock every single day because those are the 5 guys I love usually playing with. Very insightful thing there. I guess you're always playing cash games. Do tournaments fit into your schedule every so often?
Yeah, I play some tournaments when they're the right ones. If my girlfriend plays as well, And if she wants to go play the Saturday or the Sunday at the Wynn, I often will go down and play it with her. Otherwise, it's kind of when the circuit's in town, when the series is in town, when the Wynn is having a big series, when there's something big to play. Like, when the circuit's at the Rio, I'm going to be there the whole time. But it depends on what's happening, and I don't play a lot of kind of dailies and weeklies. They just aren't usually as good an hourly rate for me as cash games are. Sure. I really like tournaments. I think they're more fun than cash games, but I got bills to pay.
Yeah, I hear that. I mean, are you playing mostly mixed games or sticking mostly to Hold'em? And generally speaking, what stakes are you usually sticking to?
I'm playing 2-5 primarily, no limit Hold'em. There are definitely nights where I go to the Wynn and get in a 1-3 game waiting for 2-5, and when 2-5 comes up, I turn it down because my 1-3 is really good.
Really? Wow.
There are definitely nights where it's just better. When the Super Bowl was here, I played a lot of 2-3 at the Rio because the game was great. It was the biggest game at the Rio, and it played huge. There's a lot of rooms where I would never bother playing a 1-2 or 1-3 because there's smaller buy-ins and it's not worth it, and I would just go somewhere else if the 2-5 wasn't good. But at the Wynn, the 1-3 is a $500 max buy-in, and the games play really big. So I mean, that game's almost as big as the 2-5 at Bellagio.
Wow, that's a very big comparison. That's unbelievable. Wow.
Yeah, it's a big difference from room to room. That the Bellagio's 2-5 is a $500 max, the same as the Wynn's 1-3.
Right. Wow.
And that's
interesting.
Draws the nitty 2-5 game, and the wild and crazy 2-5 game is at the Wynn where the max is 1,500.
Right. And I'm going a little bit in depth here because on one hand, I'm asking, about you personally and what you normally play. But I feel like, this type of information, if you listen closely and, take your notes down, Red Chip listeners, it could be beneficial to you next time you plan your Las Vegas visit.
I'm not playing a ton of mixed games these days. I love mixed game tournaments, and I really enjoy mixed games, but there aren't always mixed games in Vegas that are good these days. 10 years ago, I used to fly to Vegas all the time and play the 8160 horse at the Bellagio. That was my home game, basically. I just came here and played all the time. And that game doesn't run. There's sometimes is an 8160 mix at the Bellagio, but it's a really, really tough game. And it's like 4 draw games and, 3 other games I hate. And, it plays very slow. There was even a 2040 mix that runs on occasion at the Bellagio. It was running a lot for a while, and there were 4 draw games out of like 7 or 8 games, and the games would be set in the morning, and the regulars that were playing wouldn't change them. If and if you're playing draw games with a bunch of old regs, you're going to see like 20 hands an hour, and you're paying time. It's terrible. So the money just wasn't there.
Sure.
And I'm not. I just bought a house, and I'm not really bankrolled to be playing 8160. I'm the world's biggest bankroll nit. I'm such a that's why I've never gone broke in 15 years of playing for a living, and why I'm also probably not a millionaire, because I've just been so cautious that. So I'm not rolled to play the really big mixed games, and the smaller ones just aren't quite profitable enough to eke their way past a 2-5 no limit game.
In a sense, I didn't realize, you probably didn't realize this, you anticipated my next question, which was how long you've been playing professionally, and you said 15 years. So I guess the follow-up to that is, in what way, from your experience at the felt over these 15 years, how have the games changed over your years as a pro?
Man, they're so much tougher. When I think back, it's a conversation poker pros often have. If you could take the skills you have now back to 10 or 15 years ago, how much money would you make? And the answer is all of it. Wow. I wrote an article a while ago where I said the 1,000 best players in the world are better than the best player was 10 years ago. And I only got positive feedback about that, with people saying it's more than 1,000.
Jeez.
I'm sure that's true. And I probably wrote that article 5 years ago, and it's probably true all over again. The game keeps changing, and you got to keep up. You get left behind, and I know a lot of players have been left behind. I know guys who were really good 10 years ago who are just kind of grinding out rake back online, or who have kind of given up and gotten jobs because they didn't keep improving. It's tough.
I mean, I imagine this is obviously true for No Limit Hold'em, but would you say that this is true for PLO and all the other variants as well?
Yes, but not to nearly the same extent. All the other variants have a lot more room to get good at them quickly. Even games that have been around forever. To be a world-class 7-card stud player just wouldn't take anywhere near as long as trying to compete on No Limit Hold'em on a world-class level. All the other games, first of all, there've been 3 books on stud that are worth reading.
Right.
Maybe there's like 10 training videos anywhere that are any good at all. And with No Limit, all these training sites, like, it's our fault. I'm aware that it's my fault. Like, I'm part of the problem. I'm part of the reason the game's gotten so much tougher. Like, as a training site, like, that is a thing we do. If I wasn't giving out the information, somebody else would be. Is how I tell myself that I'm not so bad. But it's certainly, we are making the game tougher by making easily accessible training content. And I've done that for 4 different sites, and I've had hundreds of thousands of people watch the videos that I've made. Certainly have run into people who are playing and who tell me that I taught them things online. I even played with a guy there's a guy who was playing at Canterbury Park years ago in one of their tournaments, maybe 3 or 4 years ago. And there was a kid 2 to my left or 3 to my left who was re-stealing with like 12 to 20 big blinds, like, really well. And it was very frustrating because I wanted to be opening a lot of pots, and it was irritating. And I pointed out to the table kind of casually, just about like, I'm not raising any more pots unless I'm calling it off against you. You're shipping it every time you have a re-steal stack. Hoping that somebody else at the table would call this guy and bust him, get him out of my way. That night, I got a message on the Pocket Fives forums that, hey, I was the guy that you were talking about re-stealing today on your left, and I just wanted you to know that I was listening to your podcast on re-steals while I was doing it.
Amazing! Wow!
I was like, oh my God!
Story.
Like I actually ran into somebody who's using my training content while they're playing against me, and they're doing it well, and it's driving me nuts. Like, that was the first time when I directly seen it. I'm aware that I make the games tougher, but that was something. And then I saw him the next day, because we both made day 2, and he showed me his iPod, and he had all my podcasts on re-steals from another training site on his iPod. He really was listening to them while he was doing it.
What a story. Also kind of like Inception, like that. Like, is this real? Like, is this really happening?
Yeah.
Unbelievable. Well, you mentioned the Canterbury Park, and that's up in Minnesota. So would you say that there's a difference in the type of player or the playing style when you sit in Minnesota or somewhere else in the Midwest versus in Las Vegas? And if so, in what way?
Yeah, there is somewhat of a regional difference. And, the Midwest is a little more conservative culturally. People are a little more careful with money. In Vegas, people don't care as much about money. In California, they certainly don't. And so you see kind of different approaches. When you're on the East Coast, you tend to run into a little more macho when people don't want to be pushed around. There's a little more aggression and a little more calling it off. And you learn specific plays that work in certain situations. And you learn, I think the key is, know what the standard plays are in your game. Always look to exploit things. In Minnesota, if a guy who's 94 years old in a John Deere hat calls the flop and calls the turn, and the flush draw comes in on the river, and he bets into me, I will fold bottom set immediately.
Not to stereotype, of course, but yeah, obviously. I hear that.
I'm a very liberal guy. I don't think the government should ever stereotype people, but as poker players, we have to. Like,
that's our job, right?
It's like, whereas if I'm playing in California, and almost no matter who it is bets into me in that spot, they almost never have it. Like, if they have it, they're check raising so much more often. And in Minnesota, nobody's check raising the river with flush. Like, they're leading out with it, and they're never leading out as a bluff. And in California, it's always a bluff. In Vegas, there's so much transient population coming through all the time that it's not always as easy to come up with standard plays in the games. But in some of those places where it's a lot of the same people all the time, you find those standard plays, and then you exploit them. You call twice with a straight draw when there's also a flush draw on board, and the flush comes in, but the straight doesn't, and you've got 9 high, and you just lead for twice the pot on the river. no one's ever calling you unless they have the flush, and you'll often know that they don't have the flush from the way they played out the hand because you know what their standard plays are, and they'll hand you pots. Whereas if you try to take that same line in California, you just might as well take that money and throw it in the garbage.
Right. For sure. I mean, it's funny, like in a sense, like I guess I can compare it a little bit to golfing. Sure, the pin is still 300, 400 yards from the hole, but every single course plays differently. So, it's certainly important to adjust based on, I guess, region as well. It's interesting to hear that from your perspective. Well, aside from playing poker, you've recently jumped into a new venture called the iNinja Poker Tour. I'm sure some of our listeners are not necessarily familiar with that, so perhaps in brief you could sort of recap and give us a little bit of the background of this iNinja Poker Tour. Well,
iNinja started in Minnesota. Started as a league. It was actually the iNinja Poker League. Guy named Isaac put it together. He was a wizard with marketing, and he worked really hard with getting this thing to grow. And he gave away some absurd number of World Series of Poker seats through these leagues, built up all this, and then started having big events. And they started blowing up. We had over 1,000 people in Council Bluffs, Iowa for an event. And I was playing with him at Running Aces when he played, and got to know him a little bit. And he, recruited me as one of the celebrities in Minnesota that kind of people knew who they were to be on his pro team. So I was on the pro team for a little while. And as much as Isaac was great at marketing, he wasn't great at running a business. He had never done it before. So he ran into all kinds of problems. I think that he paid or is paying everybody. His intention was never to rip people off, but he promised more than he could deliver, and he believed he could deliver it, and he just couldn't, and he didn't have his finances in order, and everything kind of fell apart, and he realized that he just couldn't do this. And so he shut it down a couple of years ago after, the fastest explosion of a poker tour I've ever seen in like 2 or 3 years. He was getting 1,000 people all of a sudden having main events during the series at Planet Hollywood. And then after a couple of years, I decided to start a thing. I've worked with a couple poker tours. I was the ambassador for the Mid-States Poker Tour for a while and helped Pocket Fives run a few events. And I've always liked poker tours and that business, and always thought I might get involved. So I started a thing called Next Level Poker, where we were going to do coverage and help people run events for their own poker tours and help rooms run their own events. If a room decides they want to run a series and they want somebody to come in and broadcast it and blog it and those kinds of things.
Sure.
And we had a couple events, and then Isaac called me and said, how about you take over iNinja? I'll give it to you, basically. So we took over iNinja. We paid him a little something, but it was a steal to have a thing. And
Sure.
Given the problems that iNinja had, we knew that rehabbing this thing was going to be a challenge, and it was going to have to be done a very specific way. So my reputation, not everybody loves me, but my reputation for integrity and honesty are, in my opinion, and in most people's opinions, spotless. There's nobody in the business who will tell you that I owe them money. There's nobody I've worked with who says I don't want to work with that guy again. And I knew that because of that, I could rehab the business, but I couldn't bring in anybody who didn't also have a spotless reputation. Any tarnish on the business, and we were going to be in trouble. So I brought in my girlfriend, who's an attorney. She works for the Verstandig Law, who are the kind of the poker law firm.
Sure.
And also one of my very good friends from Minnesota, Brian Soja, who has won the Nice Guy Award 2 or 3 times in the Minnesota Poker Awards. He is widely loved, and he's a much nicer guy than I am.
I love that that's a thing. I didn't realize that that's a thing. Oh, a Nice Guy Award. That's amazing.
Yeah, only in Minnesota. And he's been a tournament director and a professional player. He knows a lot about the business, and he's done some commentary on events. And so the three of us decided we would take over iNinja and make this thing happen. And as soon as we did that, people were interested in booking us.
Nice.
It was surprising how quickly people did want us to come in. So we had our first event at Diamond Joe Worth in Northwoods, Iowa, which is around the Iowa-Minnesota border, a few months ago. Went really well. We more than doubled their usual Saturday field, just kind of beta testing one of our unique tournament ideas. And iNinja is kind of based around having fun and making it fun to play poker and making it unique and different, and not just having your selling point be we have awesome structures and big fields and making it more a thing for people to have a good time. And I think that's why it grew so fast. It was.
And what would the tournament buy-in levels be for your events?
Well, our next event is in Reno in March. It's March 7th to the 17th. It's at the Atlantis, which is a fantastic poker room. $4 an hour. $4 an hour in comps. That's the only place I
Wow. Yeah, I've never even
crazy.
heard of 3. That's amazing. $4 an hour in comps. Cool.
Yeah. I love so many things about that place. I'm really glad that we ended up there. And we're going to have buy-ins from free roll all the way up to 500. Our main event is $100K guarantee, $500 buy-in with multiple entry days. We're running free roll satellites into the main, where there are a couple of seats given away, and you can do add-ons for $20, but you can sit down for free and play and have a shot at winning an entry into the main event. So most of the entries are between like 120 and 250, but the first kind of the sub main event for the first weekend is a 280 buy-in. That's a 40K guarantee, and that 280 buy-in is kind of an iNinja hallmark. That's how they drew thousands of players in the past.
Nice. I really like it. And you have this resurrection concept or something like that. What's that all about?
That's what we tested at Diamond Joe. We wanted to do it in a place where we wouldn't get a massive field without a huge buy-in, so that we could test all the things we guessed were correct. I did a lot of work on this thing, and Brian did a lot of work on this thing to make sure it wasn't going to go sideways. But you really don't know that. No plan survives first contact with the enemy. So we tested it at Diamond Joe's. Super happy that Diamond Joe let us come in and do that and kind of beta test a new concept that nobody had ever done before. Basically, to celebrate the resurrection of the tour, our logo is now a ninja crawling out of a grave. It's a zombie ninja. And everywhere we go for the next year or two, we're going to have these resurrection events where you get a little commemorative chip that's different for every event. Has a little ninja crawling out of a grave and the dates of the event on it. And it's the resurrection chip. And when you buy in, you pay an entry fee plus an add-on, and the add-on buys you the chip, and the add-on goes to the dealers. And that resurrection chip, whenever you bust, you turn it in immediately for 20 big blinds at whatever level you've just busted at.
So it's not like a re-entry or a rebuy. It's something a little bit different than that.
Nope, it's a resurrection. You come back as a 20 big blind zombie. And if that's heads up, then you go broke and you get 20 big blinds to fight again. Oh my God,
that's crazy. That reminds me of like playing Nintendo games when I was a kid. You could never kill the boss. That's crazy.
Exactly. If you go broke the first hand, you're in really bad shape, because 20 blinds is nothing, in the early levels.
Sure.
But in later levels, that chip is really valuable. And we ended up with the average stack, with it being like around 90,000 or something. We had around 9 million chips for about 100 players by the end, because the last 5 or 10 people who turned in their resurrection chip got these got a lot of chips.
Wow,
so
that's true.
It ended up being an absurdly good structure, but it didn't last a terribly long amount of time. One of the good things about it is that the field will still thin fairly quickly at the beginning, because those chips aren't so valuable. They're not adding that much. So it saves the house on dealer time, and it cuts somewhat down on how long the tournament would be if we just outright gave everybody 90,000 at the start.
Right.
But then later it makes the structure really good, and there's a lot of chips in play, and that's kind of what people want, is a little, a reasonable structure early and then a really good structure late. And this accomplishes some of that, along with being fun and presenting a lot of unique situations.
Sure. I love the innovation there, and I'm sure our listeners certainly heard a lot about iNinja. That's like, hey, maybe I'll give this a try. And again, what are the dates of your next event?
March 7th to the 17th. I'm doing a poker seminar on March 6th at the Atlantis. Free seminar on tournaments. There's 2 events a day. You can follow iNinja Poker on Twitter, or you can go to iNinjaPoker.com. Either place has the schedule. There's schedules up on Atlantis, and you can pre-register with a credit card, which is the first time I've ever seen that.
Really cool. Really cool. I love it. Well, Chris, as usual, I've always enjoyed chatting with you. And of course, today is no exception. Thank you so much for coming on the show. And just one last thing. If any of our listeners have some questions for you about coaching or just anything else, how can they reach you?
At FoxPokerFox on Twitter, or blindstraddle@gmail.com, or foxpoker.com. I'm all over the place.
Excellent. Well, again, thanks everyone for tuning in. And thanks once again to Chris Wallace. I'm Robbie Straczynski, and you've been listening to the Red Chip Poker Podcast.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode. But don't stop learning now. Head over to redchippoker.com. You'll find everything you need to get better today. Join our free, friendly strategy group and start talking poker with our coaches and community. And listen, if you're ready to take poker more seriously, sign up for Core, our $5 a week complete training platform built for players who have limited time to study. Core is packed with over 100 bite-sized lessons, from the fundamentals to advanced strategies, quizzes, achievements, discussion threads, and more. And for the bravest of heart, we invite you to check out our Pro membership, which includes 24/7 access to hundreds of videos, all of our playlists, all of our crash courses, and more. If you want to see what the top 1% of players are studying to keep their edges razor sharp, visit redchippoker.com/Ruby. That's RUBY, and get a special deal on your first 3 weeks. Until next time, run good, play better, and get there.